Welcome, 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 ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Patricia Bernard, and it is a pleasure to have you all on. And my podcast takes place. We do a podcast every Tuesday at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And we talk about health, we're talking about wealth, we talk about politics, and we're talking about entrepreneurship, starting your own business, helping you if you want to have your own LLC. Have you ever thought about writing your own story? I'm thinking in terms of, and I have educators, a lot of educators that are friends of mine, and we just feel that America, especially our children, are not reading enough. They're not getting into the books. They're not using their imagination, and they're not telling their story. And I have so many people say, I would like to write my story or write a book, but I don't know how. I don't know how to publish it. I don't know what to do. So guess what? Today, I have a special guest that I'm very, very excited about. And her name is Parker J. Cole. And she is a USA, United States of America Today best-selling author of historical romance, as well as a speaker. She's a podcast host and a CEO of Podcast Network PJC. She's an author. She enjoys exploring history through the vehicle of romance. She definitely has an imagination. And her speaking topics focus on inspiration for inspiring authors. And this young lady, man, in nearly a decade, she has interviewed authors from all over the world. She has written over 50 books. And she's also written books for Harlequin Romance. Now, I don't know about you all, but I know my mother always had a Harlequin Romance book when I was growing up. She was just a dreamer. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Miss Parker J. Cole.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Bernard.
Yes, ma'am. Welcome, welcome, young lady. How are you?
I am doing fine. I'm just so thankful to be here. Very excited to share my experiences as well as my knowledge about what it means to writing your story or a story, and just really be here to help anyone else who wants to do that, because I think words are quite powerful and you leave a legacy when you tell people your story. And I can't wait to talk about it. So thank you again for having me.
Wow, thank you so much. So we're just going to jump right in here. And I just want you to, when did it hit you that you wanted to write books? Did it start at a childhood, or did you just all of a sudden one day said, I'm gonna write a book, or how did that happen?
I can honestly say there was never any doubt in my mind that I would be a writer. I do not have a memory of where I wasn't reading or writing. And as far as my childhood goes, I always had a book and I was always telling stories. I used to tell stories to my siblings even when we were going to sleep. And I don't mind saying this because I'm grown now, but I had imaginary friends and they were the tree people. And I used
Okay.
to sit in our bedroom and look at the trees and talk to them. My sisters and my cousins all thought I was crazy, but I used to talk to tree people all the time. So I was always filled with imagination. And I really credit that to my parents because they encouraged me to read. They always encourage our creativity and they always encouraged us to seek knowledge. So I really credit my parents with that.
Wow. And that's interesting because they always tell us if you want to know about someone, we always have to go back in time, go back in history to find out where the voids were or what got them interested in particular things. And it always goes back to good parenting. And so, what would you suggest for our children of today? Because I know a lot of them. I just remember when my son was in school, and I mean, we're in an area where the school system is very good. And I remember asking him, "What are your spelling words for the week?" And he said, "Huh?" And I said, don't you have a spelling test or something?" "Mom, we just use spell check." And now, with all this artificial intelligence stuff, what do you think? Talk to me.
What parents can do to help their children and grandchildren is to take away the screen and put a book in their hand. They really do have to be active because children's imaginations are fueled by interaction. They're fueled by the parents saying, "What did you think about this book? What did you think about this poetry?" A lot of my author friends who write often credit having reading time with their parents. Now, I know some parents are very busy, but if you can eke out 10 minutes of reading with your child, that child is more likely to read and want to read because they're not just reading by themselves, they're reading with
Mhm.
someone who is also interested in the story. Or if you're a grandparent and you're raising your grandchildren, do the exact same thing. But you have to take them off the screen and get them in books. And they can start with books like they got chapter books, they have poetry,
Mhm.
biographies. You have to be active in that. If you're not active, you don't let your children know why the written word is so important and
Mhm.
why it is important to have effective communication. So that is one of the things that parents have to do. And I know we're busy, but do you really want, and this is getting kind of in the my speculative fiction era here, do you really want Skynet telling your kids what to think?
Mhm.
Because with AI coming aboard and getting more and more advanced each day,
Mhm.
it's incredibly possible for that to happen. What was once just a very nice Terminator movie is on the brink of reality. And people are nervous about this thing. So, what are you going to do to create a barrier against entities that use artificial intelligence to tell you what to think or what exactly knowledge is? So instead of you knowing the knowledge for yourself, you're
Mhm.
being told what the knowledge is. And you don't want your children to lack critical thinking skills.
Mhm.
You want your story and their own story to be told by them, not to be regurgitated by some machine and to put on a nice veneer or a nice facade. So that's why it's important. Take the screens out of your kid's hand, watch them, and engage with their reading. Even if you don't like the book, maybe they like the book. Talk to them about the book. Oh, what'd you like about this book? Ask open ended questions. So,
Mhm.
if you want your children to engage in reading, you have to engage with your children like that. And I say that because many children don't read, they find it boring or it requires them to sit still.
Mhm.
Sit still. There's no pretty pictures. They have to use their imagination. And if you
Mhm.
take a child's imagination away, how do they start to solve problems? Think about it. If you put a kid back in the day, most of us are older enough to know back in the day, you went outside, take your school clothes off, put your play clothes on, go outside. Do not come back until whenever. What did you do? You discover things while you were outside. So, yeah.
Absolutely. It was interesting, and I think I might have mentioned this a little earlier, but I was watching the Tamara Hall show this morning. I just happened to be up, and she was featuring some people that had written books. And this one lady was talking about, and this had something to do with, I know you're a Star Trek fan, and I know you could probably talk a little
Oh,
bit about
most
that.
most definitely Star
Well, they
Trek.
they got into that. But what they were talking about is taking young children, getting them to write. And I think you said this to me, Parker, about even when you write in cursive, it's making you be creative. And so let's talk about that a little bit more because and that creativity comes and I think the more that we take children and take away the ability for them to creatively think, we're taking that away from them at a young age when they're the most creative. What do you think?
I think writing, especially cursive, is a way to put your own style on your own words, right? I
Ooh.
can remember when we were kids, we had to learn to write in cursive, probably in third grade, I think third grade. And one girl liked to put hearts over her eyes, just something that simple. That was her way of expressing herself, just in
Mm-hmm.
cursive. And I loved my initials really big. I wanted my big J, big P, big C, just the big initials.
Well, they
Before I
say
would
that
have a
let me ask you this. You're saying something, you're sparking something else I want to ask you. When they look at people's handwriting and they determine their personality type by their handwriting, do you believe
mhm.
that's real?
I think there's some There's some observations to that. Do I think it's the for all and be all of a personality traits? No, I don't think so. But
Mhm.
someone who's nervous tends to write differently than someone who's more bold and more energetic. Someone who's timid, someone who's very precautious. They tend to have very um, neat handwriting and is very even. There's something to
Mhm.
it. There's something to it. I like a lot of the old mysteries, like Murder She Wrote, Matlock, Columbo. They would have those analysis, those handwriting
Right.
analysis. They would look at that. It would be so. It's very interesting. Very much so. Very interesting. Again, I don't think it's the for all and be all of a person's personality, but there's some truth to it.
I can believe that because I think, you're probably your big mouth, loud person gonna be writing all big. I just
I
guess.
am. I
Yeah.
am a big mouth, loud person. I'm just trying to control myself because I don't want your people to run off the podcast.
No, 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 no. We want you to be who you are because we want to be able to point you out down the road and say, yes, we've had a chance to talk with her one-on-one, and we're just so proud of you because I don't know that many people that are authors that have written as many books as you've written. And again, when you start getting with these big publishing companies, they see something in you. So tell me about your covers because you have some very beautiful book covers, and I love that. How do you go about that?
Well, I should start off saying that I do not like, or I have stopped referring to the slave narrative for African American fiction, only because not that not important to know, but our history does not end or begin with the transatlantic slave trade. It begins far into ancient Nubia. Okay, so we're kings and queens, and so Atlantic slave trade interrupted that in many nuanced ways. So I like to present covers of very attractive African Americans. When I write African American characters, I want to present them attractive. I want to present them without a lot of trauma. I want to present them bold and doing places and going places and doing things,
Mhm.
especially in a historical context, which is not having the slave narrative on their shoulders. So one
Mhm.
of my books I've written is called The Butcher's Daughter, and it's antebellum, based in New York during the 1840s, during the rise of the Black aristocracy. This is important because if you're familiar with the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of poetry came from that era. But this is before the Harlem Renaissance. This is a Black aristocracy. This is when African Americans were making massive strides and a single slice of life. These were people of color who had not been enslaved, or if they had been enslaved, they were gradually manumitted over a course of years. They were highly educated. And I received this information from a book by Dr. Carla. I'm sorry, I think it's Carla Peterson. I received her information from her story about her family. So
Mm.
from her story about her family back in the 1800s, I was blessed and it created a whole world for me that
Wow.
I can evolve. So this is why we're talking about telling your stories. You don't know how your stories are going to impact other people. So
Exactly.
in that book, it's called The Butcher's Daughter. It's a romance, lots of history in there. We talk about the Black aristocracy, highly intelligent. What's very interesting, for example, they didn't want to be called African Americans.
Mhm.
They wanted to be called colored Americans, even though they responded to other terms. The reason why is because they saw themselves not quite African, because most of these people were born in the US. The only few of them among the set were from truly African descent. So
Mhm.
they saw themselves as Americans. They
Mhm.
were fighting, not necessarily enslavement, they were fighting that too, but they were fighting to be seen as people, right? So they saw themselves as colored Americans. They had a more cosmopolitan view of their ethnicity.
Mhm.
So when they went out in public, they went to the opera, they went to the bars, they went to different places, and they had to show that they were just as smart, just as capable as anyone else. So I wanted to explore that part of struggle. These are Frederick Douglass's, Harriet
Mhm.
Tubman, some of the big names that we know, and some lesser named people too. So
Mhm.
that's why I was so encouraged by Dr. Peterson's book, and that encouraged my book.
Mhm.
So when you tell your story, you may think I'm telling my story for your family, but you may be telling it for someone else who can be helped by that. So that's one thing I want to share with you about that.
Wow. You're sparking some more conversation. I still got people asking me for the link, but anyway, they'll just keep joining us. You're doing a great job, Parker. I'm thinking in terms of what's going on in Florida. And I got some Floridians on here, my pickleball partners and my sunshine folks. And you may have to come to visit us down there in Florida sometime, Miss Parker. But anywho, you know that they have to get permission to talk about African American history. The parents have to sign permission slip. I don't know if you guys remember. I know some of the guys you were old enough to remember that back in the day, for the school to talk to us about sexual, when we were growing up, and puberty and all that kind of stuff, we had to, they had to sign for us to be in a little sex class where they would teach us that. And I remember that permission slip going out. But what do you think and how do you feel about limiting our history? Because you said something key. You said because this particular book, what was that Butcher? What was that particular title? Is that a book you've written?
Oh, that's a book I've written. It's a historical romance. It's book one of a 3-part series.
And how do we get that book?
It's available on Amazon in paperback and an ebook.
Okay, so we'll put that in the chat and they can put your name up and then they can find out about your books, correct?
Mhm.
Name in there. Okay. All right. But anyway, we're talking about one where you were studying, someone had written something back in the 1800s, and it allowed you to go back there. It allowed you to get an idea of how things were during that time. Why is it that you think that or they want to rob us of that history?
Now, now, please correct me where I'm wrong. Please correct
Okay.
me because I'm not quite familiar with everything because
Okay.
I'm usually digging dead head into I'm writing.
I get
Most say I'm writing. So I was under the impression that
Mhm.
with those stories, they were going to, and if this is the case, then I agree with it. I thought they were going to expand it, not just about slavery, but about other contributions that African Americans have made throughout history. That was what I was under the understanding. Because one thing, and this is just me again, so many times we focus on slavery
Mhm.
as if that
Mhm.
is the only thing
Mhm. That happened.
we have to offer the world,
Exactly.
as if that's it. That's our history. We were just all African Americans are born in 1619, right? They all just popped on the world 1619. One of my books, forgive me for
No, you're fine.
little self-promotion here. One of my books is called The Once and Future Queen, and I did a reimagining of King Arthur, and I made Guinevere a Nubian princess. And
Hmm.
it takes place in AD 505 and AD 515. Took about a year and a half to write the book, but I wanted to explore Nubia. And this is a place of kings and queens. And there wasn't the slave trade and the history. Like, for example, my fictional character, she's a descendant of an African queen who held off the Roman Empire.
Wow.
Did anyone know about that?
No, of course
Rome
not.
didn't conquer her, nor did she beat them, but she held them off to where they had a treaty saying, "You stay on your side, I stay on my side."
Wow.
Did anyone know about that?
I don't know.
Probably not.
If somebody knew about it, you could put it in the chat. Tell us if you knew about it. Okay.
But we want to
School
focus
teacher
on
didn't
slavery.
know.
See my point there? But you want to
Yes,
focus
oh,
on
I
slavery.
understand. Slavery is just not the only thing. But then there was a comment made that slavery benefited us, or benefited the slaves that were brought here because we were able to teach them a trade as if they didn't come with trades.
Well, one thing I learned too when I was in one of my books is a antebellum takes on a plantation, but I one of the things I learned is that people adapt. And one of the reasons so if you're bought from the plantation to the big house, right? Here, cook this. Well, I don't know how to cook. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll figure it out.
I figured out.
So what happened? So that's how a lot of stuff happened. But they brought with them the African cuisines they brought with them, and
Mhm.
they used that with the items that they had around. There's a wonderful documentary talking about food,
Mhm.
just how important food is. You know, food tells its own story too.
Yes.
A friend of mine, her name is Professor Piper Hughley, wonderful lady who knows very smart lady, very smart lady. She was saying how food tells its own history too. So
Mm.
that's why, and maybe it's just me, that's why I don't like to always focus on slavery. It was a horrible time, yes. But again, African Americans didn't pop out of the ground in 1619, get dragged over here. We have a very long, varied history. And it's important for us to understand that. Important for us to look past this sore, the scar on our history, and see that's just, it's a scar of a massive history. And that's just anybody. And I'm not talking about African Americans. I'm going to be fair. You know, every culture has their dark moments. Every ethnicity has their dark moments. Do we stay in those dark moments, or do we keep moving? You know, and that's one thing I liked about the butcher's daughter, is that they weren't enslaved, but they were fighting to keep moving forward. They were getting educated. If they couldn't get the money, they would raise the money. They would talk to other people to go across. If they couldn't get educated here in the US, they would go to Scotland or England, where they're more accepted over there by the time in the 1840s. They helped people, one of the first, after the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, after it was enacted, where it made it a federal crime to help an escaped slave, one guy got caught, and the community came together and raised his fee to buy him so he can go back to his family. And it was $800, you know, which
Hmm.
is probably what, 16, $15,000 now in our currency.
Right, more
But
than
they
that.
work with each other. So there was this multifaceted thing about African history, and that we're just not tapping into. We're just tapping into just slavery, just slavery, just slavery, just slavery. But again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't forget. I'm not saying that. But
Mm-hmm.
let's expand these horizons. That's why I like to use romance, because romance survives under great atrocities and great turmoil. You know, I love it. And one of my favorite authors' name is Beverly Jenkins. Back in the 90s, I never forget the first time I saw one of her books. I was at a drugstore,
Mm-hmm.
and the first book's called Night Song. And I saw a guy pushing a girl down about to do something. I said, "Oh, I gotta get this book," you know. So I went ahead and picked it up. So that's what I'm passionate about, is showing little known history about African Americans, or any ethnic group. I do write other ethnic groups too, any group, and just showing that love conquers all through history.
Mm-hmm. Right. Wow, that's so deep. Well, I tell you, I'm looking forward to seeing how we can partner and work together, and maybe do some special projects with our youth in schools and that, because I just think that this talent is being lost. And the more and more I see, the kids aren't writing in cursive, they're not doing spelling words, they're not using that imagination. They're
And
being told,
imagination is so important. I mean, I can remember my mom. I'm sorry, my mom, but my mom would have to listen to me tell stories, right? And then
uh-huh.
my grandmother, who passed away a couple of years ago, I used to tell her stories in the car. And I was telling her this one story all the way there. We got caught in traffic, so she couldn't escape, you know. So, so I
Yeah,
told the story
listen.
all the way there and back. And I remember my parents, my grandmother, just bringing that imagination to life. And I got to go to Star Trek, because huge fanatic here. I'm
Okay, so
going to
let's
try to
talk about Star Trek. Talk
I'm gonna
to me.
try to rein it in, though. I'm gonna try to rein it in,
Let's rein it
because
in,
I'm
sister.
trying to rein it in. So, but Star Trek, one of the reasons why I loved Star Trek growing up is because to boldly go where no man has gone before. And
Mm.
how far is that? As far as the farthest star, you know? And Captain Kirk is my captain. Picard's okay, you know. I like Cisco. I like some of the other captains, but Captain Kirk is my captain, okay? And
He was
I'm gonna
always
stop
so
there.
cool. He's
I'm gonna
just
stop
cool.
there. So, so yeah.
Why
But
you
that
gotta stop there? No,
imagination,
you don't have to. Talk to us. We're listening. Everybody's
it's just that with Star Trek and my grandmother, and so a lot of this attributed to my grandmother and my parents. So my mom doesn't like horror movies, but grandma liked horror movies. And so grandma liked horror movies, sci-fi, thriller, movies like that. So we're in grandma's room screaming behind her face. And one of the big ones that we screamed about was the Alien movie. Now, looking back, probably being 5 years old, you shouldn't watch Aliens. Probably, probably.
like
And some alien bursting out some guy's chest. It's quite possible a 5-year-old shouldn't see that.
PG-13.
Possibly, possibly. But we'd be screaming behind her, but that fueled the imagination as our childhood night monsters and nightmares, you know. So my first book, my very, very, very first book, was a Christian horror story. And you know, and so that's my very first book, but that was all cultivated by imagination and then reading and then getting yourself invigorated by it. So if you don't teach the kids to use
Mhm.
their imagination, even if it's something crazy, even if they have like butterflies shooting out laser beams, okay? If
Mhm.
the butterflies shoot out laser beams, so what? It's their imagination. We may look up one day and they can create artificial butterflies that shoot out laser beams. They
Right.
could use
Well,
it in war to
I
protect us from the alien encounters, you know?
I might be aging myself, but I remember the Jetsons.
Jetsons. Well,
And I
now
mean,
that's
they did
happening
a
too. You heard
look at
about in China, they're already building a factory of humanoid robots in China
wow.
today. You know, I mean,
Mm,
sci-fi is becoming, sci reality. Which is why we need which is why the laws need to be updated to catch up with this technology. But yeah, so that imagination for kids to not be able to use that, instead they're on their phones being told what to think, told what to
mhm.
find funny, told what to say. They don't know how to effectively communicate. And that's one
Yeah.
thing that reading does. It helps you to effectively communicate. And also, when you read fiction in particular, fiction helps you to learn how to empathize. Because if you write a
Mm,
good character, what's a good character we all know? Did you ever read a book called Roll Us Under Hear My Cry
no.
by Mildred Taylor? Or I don't know, some other book. Many of the books out there, the characters are written so you can empathize with that character, right? And you're just
Mm.
reading the book, they're fictional. Imagine how you could take that into the real world. Someone's having a bad day. Instead of going, ha ha, look at you, you suck. You go, you have an okay day. You're doing all right.
You know
And that,
what? You're touching on something else here
hmm
because in our society today, I don't see the empathy.
hmm
There's no empathy. Everybody is so cold right now. And they always say it starts from the top down. And when you start looking at leadership, when you start looking at the politics that are going on, I call it politics because most of it, that's what it is. You got to do your research because you don't know what you're looking at anymore. And I'm saying whether they to the left or to the right, they too far to the left, they're too far to the right on issues. You know, that is something that really concerns me, because people seem to lack empathy, and the children are starting to act the same way. And most of the time, kids are lovable. I know a friend of mine, I know Mr. Anthony, he came over my house the other day and he brought his grandson. And the little boy ran in the house, he just hugged me. And I said, oh, I mean, he just warmed my heart. And then a friend of mine walked in and she spoke, and then he looked at her and he just ran and hugged her. And I mean, this is what kids are. If they're brought up in the right manner, they're not, and all this stuff. You can almost tell a kid that you want to just take and shake, you know what I mean, and say, what's wrong with you? But it's coming from the parents. It's coming from whatever's going on, or maybe they're even too much on the phones playing the games, and it's
I think it's a I think it's a combination of all three because growing up, I was taught to respect. And my mom, we used to have to, when we met up people who are elders, we say, yes, ma'am, no, sir, yes, sir. Hello, mister. We weren't allowed to have too casual of a relationship with adults, right?
Mhm.
And what's interesting is that my generation, who grew up with these strict parents, they did something that they wanted to make sure that, and some parents were very strict. Mine
Mhm.
are strict too, for that matter.
Mhm.
Um, but they weren't like horrible. They were just
Yeah.
strict, but they weren't horrible. But then you have some parents who have really strict parents, so they wanted to compensate. So they
Mhm.
do very gently. They
Mhm.
talk everything through, so the kids think they're entitled to things
Mhm.
because now everything is based on how I feel. I feel a
Mhm.
certain way. Therefore, you should make
Mhm.
me feel this way. Just because your feelings are there don't mean that they're always valid. And not everyone has to respect that.
And
And so
doesn't
I
mean
think
they
it's a
don't have to be
combination.
hurt. Sometimes we
Yeah.
gotta hurt their feelings. They're
Because my
not
feelings
right.
get hurt all the time, especially because I get reviews of my books and some people don't like my books. Guess what I gotta do? Well, there's that tough skin of mine. You just have to
Right.
get a tough skin. I'm sure you, Dr. Bernard, when you were running for state representative, I'm sure you got lots of darts and nails and hammers and bricks thrown at you.
Look, I thought I was Miss High Society because I did 34 years with the Department of Army. I have a top secret clearance. I said, what are they gonna find on me? Then one of my strategists says, he goes, don't worry, if they don't if they can't find it, they're gonna make it up. I said, oh, well, I'd be curious to find out what they gonna make up. They made something up.
Yeah,
You
because
know
it's
what I
all
mean?
about,
I
and
would,
that goes back to the critical thinking skills. And don't believe everything you hear just because someone says it.
right.
Do research, dig into the story, stuff like that. And I know you want to talk about people sharing their stories. If you want to go into that, or did you want
Yes.
to go into something else?
That's what I want to go into now. So for because I had a few steps that I know I had written down for people that want to start to write their own story. First of all, you got to develop some type of idea, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so in the developing an idea, how would you, quickly tell someone how they should think and how they should go about that.
Well, when you want to tell your story, you want to make sure there's a purpose to your story.
Okay.
Why are you sharing your story in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
What do you hope people learn from it? Is
Mm-hmm.
your story just your life? What makes your life interesting?
Mm-hmm.
And I say this because some people just want to share, oh, I hit my toe today. Well, that's a diary entry. Put that in your diary.
Right.
Um, no one's that concerned about you hitting your toe, unless when you hit your toe, you broke it, and then you started to have gangrene, and then you get your toe cut off, and then an angel came down, gave you a new toe. Okay, that's interesting. But if you want to make sure your story has a message to it, especially if you're doing nonfiction, you want to make sure your story has a message to it. An example is a young lady who I interviewed on my show a couple years ago. She left a life of prostitution and became a Christian, and talked about her leaving that life of prostitution to become a Christian. Now she's doing to help other women come out of prostitution, right?
Oh.
That's a story to tell. And her story is heart-wrenching. And one scene in her book is where her pimp had beaters, took her money, and left her to fend for herself. And she was dressed in a t-shirt and high heels, and she was walking down a street. It was cold. She had nowhere to go, and people were looking at her horrendously. And she
Mm-hmm.
said at that moment, I'm a person too. I
Mm-hmm.
am a person, you know, and she talked about that. So you want to use your stories to say, what am I telling people? Did you overcome some great obstacle? Did you overcome um, a tragedy? Grief is huge right now. A lot of people are dealing with grief. Do you have a mental, something mental that you're dealing with, that this thing is helping you go through it? If you want to tell success stories,
Mm-hmm.
you overcame something, tell that
Right.
story. So you definitely want to make sure your life story has a purpose and a mission to it. Like I said, again, and use the more interesting bits. If you have to lead up to the interesting bits, that's good. But we don't have to know every minutia.
Right.
you know.
Exactly. Don't get too
So
detailed, but the bottom line is, and
mhm,
everybody has a story, even though they think they don't have a story, they've
mhm,
gone through something. We all have a story,
mhm,
and so, all right.
mhm.
So obstacles, think about obstacles that you may have gone through. Um, think about tragedies,
Or family history.
or
Family history
family.
is quite important. Mhm,
Right, your family history or just successes. How did you overcome? How did you become the person you are today? And so you want it interesting or people are not going to want to read it. So
mhm,
the first thing is finding your purpose, and I've talked about this a lot. I think that when people go through life, I've watched them, if they retire and don't have nothing to do and don't have a purpose, they soon leave here because they don't have anything to wake up to. So everyone, you want to define your own purpose. The other thing is, you want to do a little research, right? If you're whatever your topic is going to be or whatever your theme is going to be that kind of runs through, then you want to do a little research, would you say, to just kind of get an idea of which direction you want to go in that?
Oh, for sure. Because when you are putting out a message, there has to be a theme under it. Another example I can use was a family, um, another young lady who had been through abuse, and her
Mm-hmm.
husband had been particularly abusive, and she showed the story of how she didn't know this was happening, but the slow, insidious things that the husband did
Mm-hmm.
that were very subtle,
Mm-hmm.
and over time it became a control thing. So the thing was to let people know when you are being abused, right?
Right.
Another one was a gentleman I had on my show who talked about his abusive spouse, who was his wife, and how she manipulated and used things to keep him in the marriage, till finally he just had to run away from the marriage because it was just getting so bad. So
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure that theme is there. If it's success stories, I have another gentleman I had on my show. his book, and it's online now. I love his book. He says failure is not the problem, it's the beginning of your success. That's the name of the book. Failure is not the problem, beginning of your success. And he talks
Mm.
about how people need to embrace failure.
Oh,
Failure
absolutely.
is a teaching tool. It is
Yeah.
not nothing to be embarrassed about. If you fail, you go, okay, don't do that anymore. you
That's
know. And
absolutely
so
correct.
he talks about that theme. And it was so funny because when I had him on my show, he said, I failed kindergarten. He said, my whole life was full of failures. Now he's in the army, high ranking officer in the army. Um, he has children who are fully educated, go to college, So yeah, so he that theme of letting failure teach you and
Hmm.
educate you and help you to mature. So that's a theme. For those who have entrepreneurial pursuits, what did you do? What was that theme? Was it persistence?
Hmm.
Was it learning how to network appropriately? Because sometimes
Hmm.
it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Absolutely.
How do you get out there and communicate your idea to people? For myself, I'm an authorpreneur. How do you network with other authors? How do you write? How do you stay in contact with the publishing industry, which is what I call an organism that contracts and grows and expands in many different directions all the time? How do you stay in tune? Why is it so much to this? What about the big publishers? Should I traditionally publish? So I indie publish, so many things. And you have to make sure you have that theme there. And that theme unifies your messages. So if
Hmm.
you get your chapters, chapter 1, my name is PJ. I lived in Detroit. Chapter
Hmm.
2, always wanted to write. Chapter 3, my first story, my teacher, I knew I wanted to be a writer, but I was not validated until, I don't want to say validated. My teacher validated me when I was in 6th grade and I wrote a story. I used all the spelling words, and my teacher was like, you're such a good writer. Just, and that just catapulted me. And then when I turned 16 and my AP English teacher said, I like your style. And I didn't even know I had a style. So those little things that help you learn this is how your pathway to whatever you're going to do. So that's my writing story. My mom and dad letting us put on shows and costume plays and
Hmm.
sing for them when we were kids. My grandmother listening to us. My grandmother taught me how to read and write. That's why I was always ahead. When it came to reading and writing, I was always ahead
Hmm.
in class. So
Right. Wow. Okay. And then once you that create a schedule, I mean, a time, I find that my mind is clear early in the morning. There's no phone calls coming in, not a lot going on, and I can just think. So finding a time and a schedule to just start putting, brainstorming and putting your story together. And like you said, as far as chapter 1, chapter 2, that becomes your outline and you
mhm.
fill in the blanks afterwards. So you get started with that. And then, of course, revise and editing. And of course, we have people on our team. I know Miss Rosa, that's how I met her, was editing my first book. And Parker, you're a great author. So as you all see, we're putting together a team of people that when you get ready to tell your story, we can help you put that together. The other part is seeking feedback. And I know you mentioned that earlier, we don't always like feedback, but we got to listen to it because sometimes it's valid. It makes us better. It makes us stronger. As long as it's constructive
Yeah,
feedback.
constructive feedback is extremely important. Someone who says, "Well, you're just stupid, Parker." Well, I'm like, I know that. How does that help me, right? But when someone says, for example, I had a gentleman when I first started writing. I had a gentleman send me 4 pages, 4 single-space pages
Mhm.
about one of my books.
Wow. He took
Um,
time.
I was very conflicted at the time,
Mhm.
and he wanted to put that as a review on Amazon. He asked me. I said no. So then 2 years later, I stay in contact with him. 2 years later, I was able to appreciate what he had did.
Mhm.
If he didn't care about helping me to become a better author, he would not have spent that much time
That's too.
putting 4 pages together. One of the biggest mistakes I made as an author, and I say this a lot, I made a lot of mistakes so you don't have to. One of the
What?
biggest mistakes I made was I had released a book for a project I was part of, and my girlfriend called me. She said, Parker, what are you doing? I said, I'm talking to you. She says, no, you put a C in Colorado. And I said, what are you talking about? There's no C in Colorado. We're landlocked. And I said, there isn't? No, there isn't. And so later on, a reader came to me and he had completely annotated both my books that was in the series. Every mistake I ever did, right? Now, I could have gotten
Wow.
mad about it, but I said, you know what? Thank you so much for showing me where I made my mistakes. And he's part of my beta reader team now, right? Because since he picks up the mistake. So getting feedback, you have to be open that it's going to hurt. Let me make that, it's going to hurt. It's sensitive. When you release your art out to the world, you're basically saying, look at my baby. Isn't she pretty? And someone says, no, that's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. You know, so, and some people say a face only mother could love, right? And so when you get that feedback, you have to if you can't, take a walk away from it for a minute, but take it in the manner that it's given, you know?
Right.
Do they have to be this detail? Is it really what you need? Now, if it's a matter of technique or maybe messaging, you may be like, okay, thanks for your information, but I'm going to keep it like this. But if it's about technique, it was about making that passage or that chapter or that book even better, then take that and use it to get better because feedback can only help you.
Wow. And I agree with that. So what I want to do right now, this is just powerful. It's so interesting, and you're doing such a great job. I want to open it up to our audience. I know I have one young lady, Miss Marine. She's from Zimbabwe, and she's been texting me while we're on the show. She's so funny. But anyway, she says she wants to write a book about coming to America, but not with Eddie Murphy, I'm sure. But yeah, I'm just laughing now. Moving to Florida, didn't know anyone. She ended up getting her degrees, corporate job, and all of that. But she talked about growing up in Africa with maids and all that kind of stuff. Maureen, if you want to unmute yourself, or if you can, real quick, you can make a comment real quickly.
Yes, Dr. B, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, Dr. B, for making this happening and inspiring and encouraging to start thinking maybe I need to tell my story. Because I've had many people tell me you have a story to tell, but sometimes you don't know. And I really thank who is our host? I forgot the name.
Miss Parker J. Cole.
Miss Parker. Yes, you're inspiring just listening to you because growing up, I had imagination friends as well, but I knew I wanted to be an artist. But growing up in Africa, it was very conservative. Your family, yeah, were very conservative. So for me, trying to be an artist, they discouraged me. It's not like these days you encourage kids' talents. So my story that I would like to tell is everybody think we come from trees and we live with animals. I've had people working at a college with college students asking me if I lived next to lions, live in trees, if we have cars in Africa. And I'm just thinking, I wish they knew I grew up with butlers and maids. You don't see that on TV because it's not our TV, it's CNN and other people's TVs. So maybe I need to tell my story to show the real Africa that people don't know. That I started doing laundry, dishes, cleaning when I came to America. That's when the reality hit me because back home everything was done for us. A lot of people have maids. A lot of people are entrepreneurs. It's not poverty, but poverty is everywhere. Actually, I was shocked when I came to America because I thought I was going to California, Hollywood. I didn't even think they had grass in America. I thought everything was diamond, and that's how America is portrayed.
Wow.
And then what hit me was to see people riding bicycles, sitting under the tree, walking, begging. I mean, it was Western Africa that they show, but here they show you Hollywood. So I would like to tell my real story of coming from a real Africa that people don't know to reality, to America. So this way we can educate, especially our Black communities, because I hear a lot of whites ask me, Africa is beautiful. I've been to Victoria Falls. I've been here because they travel. But when the Blacks ask me if I live next to a lion, and I'm thinking, how can I live next to a lion? Uh, if
I'm
Af-
so
and
sorry for laughing. Lord forgive me.
yeah, and I've had these are college students, and they'll ask me how did I get here? Did I swim? And sometimes I try to give them an ignorant answer to see if they are really serious. I told one student, "Yeah, I swam," and she said, "Oh my God, you swam from Africa?" I said, "Yep, with the sharks and gators and whatever is in the ocean. I swam with them, and we were friends." And I really, and then I asked them the same question in Florida: "Do you live with gators?" And they look at me funny, like I said, "That's the same question you're asking me. The gators are in the ocean, and the elephants and the lions are in the bushes. I don't even see one in my town that I come from." So it's amazing to get those questions that people
Mhm.
think we run around naked with
I'm glad you
no
said that.
clothes. Yeah, because somebody asked me, so when you came here, were you naked? I said, yeah, I was naked when I got to the airport. They gave me some clothes. You know, you know, those are the questions I'm asked with college students. These are not elementary.
Mhm.
I'm
So
so
some
sorry.
something is something is is off somewhere that somebody gets to college and graduate and don't know much about Africa.
Right.
But the whites know. So
Mm.
that's why I need to educate in my story and tell my story, because the whites know Victoria Falls, they know the ruins, they know we have cities, they know it's beautiful. But my own black people ask me if I live next to lions, if I run around naked, if we're hungry and starving. So
Right.
and even when I look at the television, the photos that they show about, I mean, the pictures they portray about Africa, I've never seen it in Africa, and I'm African. So I
Mm.
don't. It's just like coming here to Daytona and I look for a remote place and take a video and say that's America. So that's
Mm.
It's
my story.
All
it's
right.
funny you mentioned that. If I may, Dr. Bernard,
Go ahead.
uh, to respond to you, one of the books I'm working on for Harlequin, I'm working in Haiti, and uh, right now Haiti's under a lot of stress with the government having collapsed, and they're trying to figure things out. But people tend to only show one side. They want to show the poverty side, and
Mhm.
I can't help but think if that's manufactured. I can't help but think if it's manufactured or not. Regardless, in my story, which takes place during the 1700s, my girl is an heiress and she has money. Her father has money because, again, I don't always want to portray this slave narrative, right? Yes, there were slaves, but African slavery was very differently, uh what's the word I want to use? It was just different under French government as was the American government, as was the British
Mhm.
government, right? And under the French government, they were able to keep their customs, their culture, their languages, and which is why they can trace their families back up to a certain point, things of that nature that was not done, let's say, here in America. Regardless, too, it was a very interesting place because you had Africans marrying whites, whites marrying Africans, you had mobility, all of that stuff is all mixed up in there, right? So you have this unique, interesting place of where there's really good scholarship and interesting stories to tell. And when you were saying about whether or not people grew up in Africa, if you live next to a lion, you say, why would I live next to a lion? Why
Mhm.
would you think? The first thing you think, why would you think that? Because that is what is constantly perpetuated. Even with African Americans in the US, they're constantly portrayed as gangsters. They're
Mhm.
constantly portrayed in a certain light. This is why you take back the power of words and you use words to tell your story, right? Or to
Yeah.
tell a different story. This is not to say, like we know that, like you said, there's poverty everywhere. This is not to say there are not places where that happens, but that doesn't put a broad stroke on everybody who's part of that ethnic group. You know, that's just wrong. So that's why it's important for these type of conversations. What are you gonna say, Dr. Bernard?
I'm thinking, I'm just listening to the conversation, and you always think back to your situation, your story, and a couple things. I remember being in a meeting. This is working with the Department of Army. Most time I was the only woman, let alone minority. And I said, "Oh my God!" I came in from work. I said, I came in from home that morning. I said, "Oh, it was just snowing." Well, I'm 30 miles north of Detroit, so the weather can be different. Believe it or not, 30 miles can make a difference. So I said, well, snow in my area. And I said, this guy goes, well, where do you live? I said, well, I'm in Rochester Hills. He goes, oh, you live in an apartment? Okay. So everybody at the table was just looking, and I just put my head down for a minute, and they go, oh Lord, here she go. And then I raised my head back up and I said, excuse me, where do you live? And so he said, I live such and such place. I don't even remember where it was. I said, do you live in an apartment? And I said, even though there's nothing wrong with living in an apartment, but do you live in an apartment? He goes, well, no, I don't live in an apartment. I said, well, so why would you just automatically think I just live in an apartment? But see, that's biased thinking. There's nothing wrong with living in an apartment. There's people that live in apartments, but why are you assuming because I live in a particular area, it's an apartment? Had a young lady, I'll never forget, this was years ago, sat next to her. She was nice as she could be. And she says, I understand that Black people only wash their hair once a month or once of this and once of that. And I said, because I grew up with my dad being in the Air Force, we traveled all over the world. I played girls basketball years ago. And all I know is in that locker room after that game, it smelled a certain kind of way. And I said, you know what? I said, well, I understand that if you don't wash your hair every day or every other day, it's going to stink like a dog. Now, I know that sounds terrible, right? But I got her attention. She did not mean any harm. She was speaking out of ignorance. She was saying what she had heard and what she thought and she wasn't sure of. And we have to be aware of that. We have to be cognizant of ignorance. I don't know. I think Miss Barbara is on here, and we were in. I'm going to say this too. We just came back from Mexico. We were in Puerto Vallarta, and this guy. I'm playing music. I'm jamming, man. I got all kind of music, any kind of music you could think of. Jazz. I have, of course, soul. I've got rock. I've got da da. So it had like an upbeat jazz, and the guy goes, hey, he goes, he had a few drinks and he was trying to say something. Sometimes they be trying to hit on you too, but they just don't know what to say. And he goes, hey, what kind of music is that? And I said, excuse me. And he said something about, hey, bro, or something, make comment. He made a crazy comment. And so I said, excuse me. And so then his friend kind of corrected. He goes, man, what are you talking about, bro? What are you talking about? He goes, I'm sorry, I'm just joking. He goes, but what kind of music? And I said, well, we are ignorant at times. They go, oh my gosh, she just called you ignorant. I said, no, let's hold on. I said, ignorance means we don't know. We can all be ignorant. It just depends on the topic. But see, I switched that all around. But see, that conversation could have went south quick. But his buddy kind of saved him. Barbara, you remember that conversation. And we just kind of laughed, but they love my music. We're in the pool and that. So what am I saying here? America has become more ignorant, I think, than ever before because we're listening to sound bites. We're not reading Parker J. Cole. We're not reading. We're not researching. We're just taking whatever we hear as gospel. And so, it ties into what you're saying, Marie. How did you get here? Did you, are you running around naked? Because guess what? In the United States, America, all they ever portrayed Africa was people swinging through the jungle. When I first saw the cities and that, I'm like, oh, wow, it's modernized. But, that's the kind of stuff that's why we travel. That's why it's so important for us to travel. If you've never traveled, you've only read one page, if that much, of a whole book. So
I like the fact that you said that because traveling does expand your horizons and you start to see people really much are the same all over. They all have the same problems. They have the same issues. The food may be different, just different seasonings, but everyone's eating chicken, everyone's eating rice, everyone's eating bread, just different ways. And once you start to realize that we're all really part of humanity, the barriers start to come down and the ignorance becomes knowledge, right?
yes.
And that's why you do tend to have a more nuanced view of life. And I'm not saying I've arrived or anything, but just by reading and learning about different cultures, like my agent is West Indies, right? And she's also a woman of African, she's African descent, West Indies, right? But she's British. I'm American. Americans are brash, loud, everything. British are very reserved.
Yes.
And one time I had deleted a book by mistake and I was in tears. I could not stop crying. I was crying, and I called her, and my emotion actually unnerved her, right? Because you don't show that type of emotion, generally speaking, in English. And she's like, and she goes, this is my horrible, bad British accent. You're not going to cry on me again, are you? Yes. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But she's like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Calm down, calm down, calm down. And so, but it unnerved her because I'm loud. I'm like, oh my gosh, I
Right.
lost my book. And she's like, for her, if she's upset, that's rather disappointing.
Right. Calm, cool.
Are you mad? I don't know if you're mad. So, but the cultures are different, expressed different, and done differently, So when you travel, you will start to understand. If you read, you start to especially read different books by different things. I love romance, so romance my wheelhouse, but I read all kind of genres: speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, paranormal. The only thing I don't particularly care for is steampunk. Thinking like Back to the Future 3, steampunk. That's because it's too mechanical, and I'm not really good at mechanics. So they'll go nuts and bolts and whatever. It just flies over me. But yeah, so those are my thoughts. I know we're getting close to the end of our podcast today, Dr. Bernard, but
wow, I'm telling you, this has been fantastic. I can just listen to you and go on and on and on. But what I do want to tell our audience is that I want you guys to definitely go to Amazon and hey, let's order a book. What is your latest book that you have out? What do you recommend for our audience?
if you want short books, just something really quick to hit, if you like romance, you can read my one book called The Butterscotch Bride.
The Butterscotch Bride.
Yeah, it's my my plantation one I told you about, but it doesn't read with a lot of trauma. There's not a lot of trauma in there or anything like that. The Butterscotch Bride. If you want something from ancient times, you can read The Once and Future Queen, which is Guinevere reimagined as a Nubian princess. So if you like King Arthur, stuff like that.
I have the Butterscotch Bride. I'm putting it in the chat. And what's the
the
other?
Butterscotch Bride.
What's the other?
The Once and Future Queen.
The One to the Future Queen?
No, The Once and Future Queen.
Oh, okay. The Once and Future Queen. Okay.
If you want something really quick, fun, quirky, I did a holiday one, Christmas one. It's just it's called Wish Upon a Strawberry Shortcake. It's about 40 pages. It's quick.
Okay. Okay.
And I got a couple of contemporaries out there, but
okay.
I'm primarily historical. Do you like space operas? Any sci-fi people here? I got a space opera that's called The House of Hathaway. If you like space operas, that's The House of Hathaway. That was my ode to Star Trek, my ode to fairy tales, and my love of romance all mixed in that one. So The House of Hathaway. And if you want to explore history about the Black aristocracy, The Butcher's Daughter.
Let me take one of the Butcher's Daughter. Okay.
But you can just browse through my catalog and you can see it there on Amazon. I have one more coming out in June. No, two more coming out in June.
Two more? And so you just sit back and write, huh?
I write between 8 o'clock and 2 in that morning. That's when I tend to write the best.
Wow. Well, I tell you what, we've had a great audience. Any other comments real quick? Because we're going to go ahead and end because we do start on time and try to end on time. But you're going to have to come back, Miss Parker J. Cole.
I would love to, especially for those who want to get started writing and you don't know where to start, or you want someone to kind of hold your hand a little bit. I would love to talk about that at your convenience, of course.
So this is what I need for the audience. You guys get with me. Let me know if you're really interested in writing your own book. And I'm telling you, we're going to have a team of experts, especially we've got Miss Parker Cole right here. And, fine. They're saying, okay, where is she? She's from Michigan.
Born and bred in Detroit.
Born and bred in Detroit. Yes. They're saying great podcast. Excellent. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much. You don't
Thank
know
you
what
for
it
having me,
means.
Dr. Bernard.
Yes, I'm so glad. And everybody, audience, I want you guys to know, just kind of hang in there with us. We're going to get this thing, because I know it's going to blow up. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But you all are going to be our special crowd that we're going to have special discounts for you and all that. I haven't put it all together yet, but I'm going to make sure I take care of you all, because without you, it would be no us. So thank you so much. And Parker J. Cole, thank you so much for being who you are. And of course, your mom, Miss Rosa Worth, has done a fantastic job with you. She's so proud of you. And so, again, they say the fruit don't fall too far from the tree. So thank you so much. You all have a great evening. And I'll see you guys next Tuesday, 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And have a blessed evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.